Okay, so in a previous video that I uploaded just a little bit ago, I talked about my thoughts about the overall movie of Rise of Skywalker, and that definitely had some spoilers in it. This that I'm going to talk about right now doesn't really have any spoilers. I'm just talking about a concept or some ideas that were brought up, not just by this movie, but just kind of the trilogy. There is a little bit of information about something that happened in the movie, but it's not really a spoiler because it's something that has happened in previous movies. So, just to let people know, this is not a spoiler type of video. Um, One of the things that I think is interesting is that we, in this last trilogy, have seen the stormtroopers in a more humane light. Not necessarily they are more humane, but we have a more humane perspective because we're seeing them not just as these faceless clones, as was thought previously, but we come to learn that they are people who have been abducted as children and conscripted into the service of the Empire and later the First Order. So we kind of learn this when we meet Finn in Force Awakens, that he was forced into this service of being a stormtrooper, and it wasn't something that he desired or something that he wanted. And I thought it was really, really interesting because I listen to a lot of different podcasts and watch videos of people who review movies, the kinds of movies that I like. And of course, I read and I watched a lot of different people's takes and perspectives on The Rise of Skywalker and what they felt. And one of the things that happens in this movie that is no surprise, that is not a spoiler, is the fact that stormtroopers die. Like, they're getting shot at and things like that. And it's interesting that many of the people who I listen to happen to be men who are white, and most of them are from a Western background. So they are either from like an American background, or they live in Europe, or something like that. And so they have a specific, particular view of the world. And like I said, I enjoy listening to a lot of these commenters and hearing their perspectives, and I really like to hear what they have to say. So there's nothing negative that I have to say about their perspective, but just an observation that it's very different, I think, than someone who may not come from the same kind of background as they do. Because one thing that I heard said, sort of as a criticism of this movie, was the fact that you do have a bunch of stormtroopers who die in battle and things like that. And a lot has been done to sort of humanize stormtroopers. And like I said, more than one person, commenter, reviewer has made this point that, wow, the stormtroopers are really, these people who have been forced against their will to participate in this, and isn't it so sad that they're now being treated indiscriminately? Because prior to this, in the original trilogies, you kind of thought, oh, they're just these faceless people who are part of this army. And so you don't really have to care too much if they're getting disposed of by the good guys. And that is kind of part of, all of these sci-fi sorts of movies and films. Like you have in the MCU, you have the Chitauri, they're just these faceless aliens that are coming down and, wreaking havoc. And so the good guys have to come and, destroy them. And that's just it. I even remember in Infinity War when, all of Thanos' forces are coming down on Wakanda. You see all of these faceless creatures coming to try to attack our heroes again. And I think it's Proxima Midnight who says, like, oh, we have blood to spare, or something like that. Like, these are disposable beings, it doesn't matter. And that, having a disposable CGI army is something that is a classic staple of, especially the MCU, but definitely lots of different types of, these movies. Even in Independence Day, you don't find a bond with the aliens, you just know that we're gonna attack them because they're attacking us. And so they're the enemy, it's very clear, the good guys are here to beat the enemy. That's it. So when it comes to Stormtroopers now, because this last trilogy has done a lot to say that, hey, these are actual people, it really felt weird for many of the commenters because they were just kind of like, well, it just felt wrong to kind of cheer their deaths in the same way because they're people, and especially because some of them were children when they were taken. And so that was something that they really felt some kind of a way about, and not necessarily that it spoiled their perception of the movie or anything like that, but just that it really kind of made them pause and like, wow, what kind of a direction was the director thinking and taking it when they made us empathize with them and empathize with Finn and all the rest of them because of our relationship with Finn. And then later we see them getting blown up, like, whatever. And I thought it was really interesting because that is something that happens in real life. And I don't want to like make it a downer or anything like that, because I personally go to movies for escapism. I don't go to movies that remind me of real life because I want to live in a fantasy world for 2 hours and kind of forget the things that are happening. And even though there are great documentaries and great stories that are told through fiction about things that reflect real life, that are tragic and horrible, that to me isn't something that I do for entertainment. I want to go and I want to watch a fantasy world, and I don't want to really feel the weight of consequences in the same way that I would if I'm watching the news, right? So there are some kinds of movies that I don't go to see for pleasure because I'm just kind of like, no, that's not enjoyable to me. So I don't want to take away from anyone's enjoyment of Star Wars or any of these other kinds of movies, but the reality is that these commenters and these reviewers who are talking about how they feel this empathy for these stormtroopers now that they know that they're human, I couldn't help but think, well, there are real life people who are in these very same circumstances where they are conscripted into a force or an army as children against their will. They are grown to be soldiers. They are taught from a very young age that this is what they need to do, and they join these insurgent forces, and this is kind of the reason why I made an emphasis of the fact that some of the people that I listen to are coming from this background of being part of the Western world. We in the West send armed forces to go and fight these people, and I think that part of the reason why I kind of already have that perspective in the back of my mind is because I am a person of color, and so knowing that many of these people that we send forces to fight are also people of color, it has always been, to me, something that has made me feel empathy for them, even though our nations who send their military may paint them as the enemy. And the truth is that when you hear about people getting droned and insurgents being eliminated and things like that, sometimes not only are they people who have grown up and been a part of this since they were children, but some of them actually are children. Like some of the people who get killed in these conflicts and who are these armed soldiers that are our enemies are nothing more than adolescents. And I think that a lot of people don't realize that, or they don't want to realize that. And this is not to be a knock on the military or anything like that. My dad is a vet. Both of my grandfathers are vets. I have cousins who are in the armed forces right now. I mean, so I have an appreciation for the idea of what the military stands for, but I also understand that the conflicts that we engage in affect real people in real life, and those people aren't just a faceless, disposable CGI army, and it might feel that way because we don't know those people the same way that we know and consider American people or people from a Western country to be our in group, and those people who are in Middle Eastern nations or in African nations sometimes, depending on what time period we're talking about, we engage in these conflicts and we just kind of say, well, that's over there, that's them, they're beating those enemies, not really realizing that these enemies are human beings with faces and stories and pasts and lives, and sometimes this was not a life that they have chosen. This is a life that they were forced into, in the same way that, these stormtroopers in real fashion were grown as soldiers from a very young age. And it's funny because stormtroopers are fictional characters, right? And to hear people in these videos and in these podcasts kind of demonstrate this high level of empathy for fictional enemies, I thought that it was quite fascinating because in real life, this happens, and that same empathy is not expressed often. And I don't know if we need to really recapture our idea that we are all part of humanity in order to really recognize the fact that, hey, we're not just battling people who are the enemy, but we're battling people with lives and stories. And I thought that was very, very interesting to see, that there was this care about the stormtroopers in ways that you don't see right here and now in real life. And it's not necessarily something that I'm, again, not faulting them for, but it's just something that is a part of human nature when we don't see the other people and the way that they are impacted, their lives, their families, their neighborhoods, all of those things. One of the things about the anti-war movement at the end of the 20th century was the fact that it was sparked by, for the first time, people being able to actually see the ravages of war, because previously, you send people off to war and you don't really have a conceptualization of what's happening over there. But when in the middle of the 20th century, when we are having media coverage of things and photography is becoming a staple part of telling news stories, and then later on, as the years pass, we're incorporating those photographs into our news stories, not just about local things, but about things that happen abroad. And then we see pictures coming from foreign war zones, and they're now part of our news cycle, and people are seeing and watching how these people in these foreign places are being impacted because they see these pictures in these newspapers. Now it's not just, oh, we're sending you off to a foreign land to have this battle with, this faceless anomaly, but these are real humans that are being impacted by our military and our war with them. And the anti-war movement was sparked by the fact that people were able to finally see that, wow, this is a real thing. And psychologically speaking, it's really easy to create an in-group of people who are like you and create an out-group of individuals who you know nothing about. But the more you know about them, the more difficult it is to continually exclude them and to try to deny their similarities to you. And man, I just gotta say that I think that people really need to take the time to recognize that there are wars and conflicts going on all around this globe, and real people are being involved and being impacted. Not to say that some wars or some conflicts don't have a rationale or a reason why we are doing them that is a positive one. I mean, for instance, yeah, it totally made sense to try to take down Hitler. Like, we could not just stand idly by. But then there's some conflicts where it's like, okay, is it really necessary to engage in those things? And I think we need to contemplate more about that, and not just the people who are waging war and the political leaders who are making the decisions, but the people in the countries that are engaging in these war efforts need to really be engaged to the point where we understand what's happening. And when we talk about drones and drone strikes, what does that mean? Who is being impacted? Who are the people, real human beings, who are getting hurt by this? Just being knowledgeable and understanding that our actions as a nation have consequences, and it really does impact people. And if we can muster up that same level of empathy for other humans in real life as we do for fake stormtroopers in a movie, then maybe we would make some different decisions about the things that we support in real life.